Greetings, fellow YouTubers. I wanted to talk about immigration and social alienation within Western culture or Western civilization, and I'll focus on the city of Toronto because that's the place I know best. This is where I grew up. This is where I currently live. And before I get into Toronto, I want to call to your mind the movie Blade Runner from 1982, and that's already 35 years old, so I guess maybe not everyone's seen that movie, but it was starring Harrison Ford. It was one of Harrison Ford's first big movies. I know he was in Star Wars, but it was a popular movie, kind of like The Matrix later in 1999, that really got you thinking about where society was headed. And they, way ahead of its time in anticipating the complexities, the problems of calling your country a multicultural country or a multicultural society, because in that movie it's set in Los Angeles, and in 2019 is the setting, which is, it's 2 years from now, so it's appropriate that we bring up that movie at our current time. And it portrayed Los Angeles as basically Asian, basically Chinese or East Asian looking, and all the writings in Mandarin script. And so Harrison Ford, he's this Blade Runner. That's not really important. He has an interesting job tracking down these androids, but I'm not so much interested in the technological side of the movie, just sort of this undercurrent, this theme kind of in the background. It's not such a central issue in the movie, but underlying framework theme of multiculturalism gone to its extreme, which is one group managed to flood in and completely swamp what would you call the traditional American people. And of course this is a difficult topic to discuss, because then people will say, oh, is it the white culture that's being suppressed, or but no, I'm not a racial purist, as you may have noticed from my videos. Most of my friends are white, but not all of them, of course. And I've been involved in other cultures, and so I don't hate other cultures. I'm open to them. That doesn't mean I want open borders, but my mind is open to other cultures. And Toronto's a great city, as I'll be discussing, for many reasons, like the food, and well, but not always the food, but we have that diversity of restaurants. But it was in Blade Runner, they're showing you how this thing can go wrong. So I want to talk to you in the rest of this video about my experience growing up in Toronto. And of course, I was born in 1986, so I would have been already in the public school system in Toronto by the early 90s, and then in high school by the early 2000s, and then I went to university in Toronto as well. So as a kid in junior and middle school, sure, it would have been diverse right from the first grade. Yeah, there would have. I had a Korean friend, and there was an Indian guy. I remember his name was Deep. And I thought that was kind of a funny name. Deep, you're very deep. And he was just as brown as you can imagine. And yeah, there was an Albanian. And what was his name? I don't remember. But yeah, that's how it was. I went to Wedgwood Junior School in Etobicoke on the west side of Toronto, suburban neighbor. I'm from a comfortable middle-class background, so I was blessed in that sense. But yeah, diversity was always there. And then in middle school, it was even more diverse. There were probably a lot more blacks, South Asians in my middle school. I would call it a middle school where I am, just grades 6, 7, 8. And then on to high school. But the middle school, that was probably the most diverse school I was ever in. And this was never a problem. This was always just something that you kind of accepted that was normal. And I can't say I ever had any issues with other students based on race. And I would sometimes mimic other students' accents. And I remember I got in trouble by the teacher once in the 4th grade because I was imitating this Ukrainian guy, Mickey Pavlinsky. I was imitating the way he spoke, like, are you supposed to? He would always ask, are you supposed? And there's a certain way in his accent, the way he said that. So, and it wasn't with any sense of malice, but it would really crack up the other students when I did this. And, I when I got to be about 12 and I got better at imitating Indian accents, imitating a Chinese, and, you know, imitating accents. Maybe that's why I got into languages later on, because I've always had this natural inclination to want to mimic and listen to the way people speak, and it can be really funny sometimes. So that would make some people uncomfortable, like, oh, you're a racist for doing that, but who cares about that anymore? It's 2017. So I'm just reflecting on you that there was never any malice, but perhaps there was a sense of alienation later on when I went to university. In high school, actually, I went to Etobicoke Collegiate Institute, which was kind of a nicer high school in the sense that it wasn't like a, you know, low, it was in a nice area. It was in a nice upper class residential part of Toronto. So it was a less diverse school. I mean, it was certainly diverse in that we had lots of Serbians and probably some Eastern Europeans there and some Asians, but not really, like there must have been like less than 10 black people in school and not too many Middle Eastern people either. So it was still kind of like a lighter skinned, mostly white school, and actually really cliquey. And I didn't much I liked the high school for in the sense that some of my teachers, who were all white men, I mean, not all my teachers, but the ones I liked, they were all white men. So, yay, white men, go, a few of them, not, some of them were idiots. Like my 20th century history teacher, he was an idiot. But yeah, I remember the other teacher I had, Dr. Smale, he taught history. He was really good. He really lectured us like it was a university almost. He was serious. And I learned about the Reformation and a lot of Western history from him, world history too. And also my human geography teacher, I think his name was Mr. Lawrence, and he'd spent time working in a prison before. And he was only 30 years old at the time. And so I was in the 12th grade. So I do have positive memories of that school for some, like, yeah, I did find subjects that I was interested in at that time. And yeah, wasn't so aware of this whole diversity. Sure, that's going to be, you're going to be aware of that in Toronto, but on the other hand, that school was really cliquey. There had all these cliques, and so that was one thing that was kind of annoying to me about middle class white culture, upper middle class white culture, because I was just from a regular, what I perceived to be just a regular middle class kind of family, but maybe it was because I hadn't gone to the same nice junior middle school that they had, because they kind of, most of those, you know, I was kind of in a weird part of the city, so I ended up going to that school, not a lot of other people had. So anyways, I'm rambling about my high school years here. I'm just saying that was the kind of high school it was all right. And then in university, a completely different experience. In the University of Toronto, certainly that's what, for the first time living downtown in residence, I would have noticed, oh, this culture, something's fallen out here. There's something, the bottom has fallen out of the boat, and there's nothing holding this thing up anymore. So what do I mean by that? Well, I'd say the breakdown, when I went there, the demographic breakdown, I guess this would have been about 2005, 2004, when I went to university for the first time. It would have been about 1/3 Chinese, you know, maybe Korean, or mostly 1/3 Chinese, 1/3 South Asian, so Indian, Pakistani, and 1/3 the rest, so white, and then everything else mixed in there. So I was in St. Michael's College, and yeah, you got to know some people, but not really that many people. I mean, there was no sense of campus community or unity, not that there really should have been, and I've railed against universities. You know, I don't have a very high opinion of them. You don't need to go to university, at least not nowadays, at least. You probably shouldn't in many cases, unless you want to do something very specific like engineering, commerce, and not even commerce, but, you know, like something technical or mathematical. You have exactly what, you know exactly what job you want to get, then that's a bit different. But generally, I'm bringing it up university to say that it's right in the middle of the city, completely alienated. You don't feel like you're part of a university. You don't, or at least part of any sort of campus community there. It's just blends into the city there. And the same can be said of your relation to your fellow students. With all these people from different cultures, there is no assimilation. So maybe that's a common thing that we're now hearing. And it's true, because as uncomfortable as that may make some people to hear, immigrants need to assimilate. And that hasn't exactly been happening in Toronto, and I guess in other parts of Canada. But certainly Toronto's the biggest city in Canada, so we have several million people now, and certainly growing as fast as we ever have been. And assimilation is great, and we want people to assimilate. We don't want to close our borders and say no one can come here, but at the same time, when you let in people who aren't necessarily going to adapt, and at least, if not change all their ways, and change, learn English and do certain other cultural accommodations, cultural adaptations. And so I can't speak too much about Islam, because I haven't had that experience with too many Muslim people in Toronto. I know there are Muslim people here. We do have mosques, just like we have, Hindu temples and churches and everything else. However, I do know, of course, having studied history, that Toronto was founded on a Christian, British, English, Scottish, later Irish, mostly European Christian base until relatively recently. Those would have been the demographics of the people here until after the 1970s. That was when people from Asia, Africa, and other parts of the non-European, non-Christian world would have started coming here, and coming here every year, more or less, in increasing numbers, and a very strong flow of people that we see today. So Toronto, despite all of its strengths, hasn't necessarily benefited from diversity. I hate to break it to you, Justin Trudeau, but diversity is not always, or even at all, a source of strength. As much as I wanted it to be so when I was younger, and I have no bitterness towards other people in my city here, Toronto. I mean, I've spoken about this neighborhood I live in right now, probably about as diverse a neighborhood as you could get in Toronto. And I must be unique in being a white male here. I don't see too many other white males here that are actually like native-born Canadians. I see lots of Portuguese here, but they're all immigrants, and Latinos from Latin America, from a lot of Jamaicans in this neighborhood, and then also black Canadians that have many generations here, so they're Canadian too, but they're black and they have their own culture. But certainly a lot of Jamaicans. I mentioned Portuguese, Latinos, but also you'll get in all the other groups too. I mean, certain numbers of Asians. But basically, what I'm saying here is that this is great, and we have some different restaurants, and I can get Thai food, or if I wanted to, I could go to get Brazilian food. But other than that, these cultures don't blend together, and yeah, it's not a good feeling at the end of the day. It's not a bad feeling, it's just, there's nothing really here. There's no future here for me. So this isn't a neighborhood I'll be in, hopefully not too much longer from now. I'm just here because it's a convenient place to live. But yeah, you walk around. I mean, there's a bingo hall right behind my house here, and that just attracts all sorts of characters. And lower income individuals, probably a lot of junkies hang around there, and that's fine. But it's just like, that's something that I'm never going to mix with. So you're confronted with that in the city. It's right up in front of your house. So I can't speak at all for what it would be like living in a smaller town, in a rural setting, and perhaps you do. Perhaps you live in a town that's not as diverse as I'm describing here. But Toronto is about as diverse as you can get. I mean, I know they talk about Germany, Sweden, all this stuff. London being 40% Pakistani, and similar situation with Vancouver and Chinese. It's like 40 or something % of the population. But fundamentally, in terms of overall size and proportions, I mean, Toronto has been called the most multicultural city in the world. So I'm kind of like, have a bit of a privilege talking about this multicultural issue, because I've been living in it for 30 years, more or less, and then traveling the world. So I've been in other cultures too. I don't hate other cultures. I studied anthropology. I mean, I could have studied something else, but I did find it interesting. I am genuinely interested in learning about the world and geography and the planet and all the different ways. But I still have to admit that the West has been the major project here. And though we may not be too religious anymore, and I'm not a religious person. I mention God sometimes, but I'm spiritual, and religious is a little different. And so, but you know, you have to realize the Christianity, not just in the religious sense, but you know, our names, the English language, it's all been wrapped up in Christianity. It's kind of like the framework, the ways of doing things. You know, sure, Christmas isn't religious anymore, but we still celebrate it. So yeah. This is all coming from a Christian foundation. Universities were Christian institutions. That's how they were born. And that's how they were for most of their history until recently, except in a few rare places in the West that would still, teaching institutions that would still call themselves Christian in the West. Those are pretty rare. Anyways, we've all been changed. We've been changed so quickly, and so, you get this reaction of, people, not too many people are actual total racial purists and saying, like, okay, we have to be culturally rigid and we have to ban the Koran. Like, I can, that's not a good idea of this Dutch Freedom Party with they want to ban the Koran, so then you're going to ban free speech. That's not the way to do it, but I do agree with them in principle that they oppose Islamization of their country. They've correctly perceived that that's a problem. Now, we haven't seen so much Islamization of Toronto or Canada. I don't know. We did let in 30,000 Syrian refugees. That's not enough to Islamize your whole country, but if it continues on that level, then you may start seeing more incidents. And whether terrorist attacks from one group against the other, because there's going to be a white reaction to that too. There's going to be more incidents like this. But it doesn't matter about Islam. It matters. What matters is the West, because it could be some other culture flooding in here too, like Chinese, and even if it's not one culture, even if it's just a mishmash of many cultures, and neither of them has the upper hand because they're all less than 5% of the whole population, that's still not a good situation to be in. You need assimilation. And it's kind of cynical if you say it all has to be racial. It can only be white people. There can't be any intermixing. I mean, sure, there's differences between the races. Oh yeah, IQ levels, sure. But I mean, come on, are you going to be a little pragmatic here? Unless you're going to resort to ethnic cleansing here. And that didn't work out so well usually. So kind of, for me growing up in Toronto, we need to get along here. But at the same time, we just need to assimilate culturally. That means learning English. That means respecting our history. We can be individuals too. I think we can come to a medium there. So I think one of the ways we get cultural assimilation is by having a middle class. And unfortunately, we don't have a very healthy middle class anywhere in the West right now. Certainly not in a city like Toronto. It's basically been shrinking. So when you think about Toronto, you think I can break it down for you in terms of the categories of people here. I've mentioned kind of offhand immigrants, but also, the condo dwellers who tend to be already set, like they have some job with a good income, or they never would have got a condo in the first place. I don't like the idea of living in a condo. I could have invested all my money in getting one and then I guess had my future taken care of, but I never saw the point of putting all my money in a stupid box in the sky. I'd rather live in the first floor of a house. I like being close to the ground. I like being able to easily go outside. I don't know. But this condo dwelling culture is a huge portion of our culture. It's not necessarily mostly white. It probably is at least 50% white. I guess. I don't know. I didn't have any statistics here, but it's just as diverse. But I'm in a class way. It's certainly middle upper class kind of living. You have Queen Street West, sort of the bohemian chic kind of part of the city. That would include a lot of condo dwellers. I can't stand Queen Street West. It's just dirty. Hipsters and their stupid tattoos and their stupid beards, and then they grow the beard and then they cut their hair short here. It's like, what are you trying to do? If you're going to grow a beard, then at least let all your hair grow long. I don't know. But anyways, so a lot of, you can tell that probably I don't like a lot of Toronto. But obviously, it has its problems. And yet it's still called the most livable city in the world. Well, yeah, I guess it is. It's a paradox because in many ways the city sucks. But yet they call it one of the most livable cities in the world. That's a freaking paradox. It depends on who you're talking to. If you're talking to another category of the city, someone working in the financial district, not as an abused intern, but someone who's really made it. And I agree that they work long hours. Oh, they've put in, but I mean, they have a different perspective on the matter. They're pulling in the six-figure salary. They have property in the city, so for them, you know, it's just a different, yeah, the city's great and we're all getting along, and how could you possibly suggest that things aren't so great here? What's wrong with you? Can't you see that just all these immigrants are assimilating so well, and meanwhile they're living in this like nice condo, and then they don't have to live with these immigrants. I do. I can tell you right outside my window that there's a house where a lot of black people do drugs, and I don't see that all the time, and doesn't necessarily bother me that much. But oh yeah, the house is in a really fucked up location, and it's right sandwiched between what's it called? Cash Money. If you know what Cash Money is, kind of like Western Union, and they have like a bulletproof glass in there. And then, so it's sandwiched between a Cash Money and then a Sikh community center, or like a two-story Sikh bill. And I know nothing against the Sikhs. I hear they'd like to assimilate too, but they certainly keep their, you know, their beards and their turbans, and they have the orange. That's directly outside my window. And then, yeah, so down the street here would be probably mostly Portuguese, you know, and the next house over, probably Portuguese renters. So I actually live in the midst of immigrants. I've been in the midst of immigrants my entire 30-year life, when I haven't been traveling in other countries and being even more exposed to other cultures. I don't hate other cultures. I think most people are good people. But you can't expect this mass immigration you can't expect these mass flows to keep coming in here. Politically, there's going to be a reaction. And it won't necessarily be people like me who started. It will be people in the more whiter areas that haven't already succumbed, probably in suburban areas, smaller towns around Canada. You'll get politicians like Kelly Leitch gaining traction. She actually proposes similar to Trump immigration ideas, like, oh, immigration actually needs to be controlled. And so we're not trying to shut the borders, but you have to, at some point, turn the tap down. You have to turn the valve a little, okay? Like when you have the hot shower on, you don't want to burn your skin. You got to adjust the flow and probably turn the valve a little to, you know, reduce the flow of water, because it's going to flood your bathtub or it's going to scald you. Okay, so that's what's happening here. We're just this uncontrolled immigration flow, and Toronto has been ground zero of that just as much as London, England, or any other city in the world, I can guarantee you. We don't have a Muslim mayor like London does. It could happen though, sure. We could have elected Olivia Chow, the NDP. She was from China. She lived in Canada for 30 years, but she was still a Chinese immigrant who had trouble pronouncing certain English words. So anyone that can happen in Toronto. I mean, we had Rob Ford before. He was, you know, your white male, drunk, intoxicated, and then he died. And people hated him for the very reason that he did what he wanted to do. So we all miss him now, and he's dead. Anyways, no, he was probably a terrible mayor, but a good guy at least. You could tell that he was a good guy. I don't care about him smoking crack. That was pretty funny. He'd probably be a funny guy to have a drink with. So we don't have this large middle class. Maybe that's the biggest problem. The middle class will naturally, by its force, by its forward-looking, upward-looking direction, will encourage cultural assimilation. Or not. Maybe you disagree with that. I just like to think that when you have a healthy middle class, you also have cultural assimilation naturally going in, just like you had going on in America and Canada for most of our history until you know, into the 20th century, depending on when you want to start it, whether, you know, before the First World War, certainly after, things started to get but, you know, even in the 50s, that was very prosperous. It wasn't really until the 70s, 80s that we really started have this current demographic thing. And, you know, we're all for cultural assimilation and having other groups come in here. And I mean, sure, there'll always be a few people who are anti-Semites and, you know, or just sound like they're from the Jim Crow era, or, you know, you'll have those people. But we all know that those people are a small minority, and most of us are sane enough that that we just all want this to work, and the economy has to do well. We can't have these corporations and government in cahoots, like, you know, preaching, no, we're doing this all for good, but really it's just about flooding the country so with these immigrants who aren't even from easily assimilable countries. I know that's probably not the right word to choose, it's too long, but, you know, something that can assimilate more easily, right? Like something with a European background. I'm not saying you have to close off countries like Donald Trump had sense to close off certain countries momentarily. I believe he was blocked from that, but, you know, it points in the right direction. Like some countries are safer or more valuable, have more to offer you than other ones. Others are downright dangerous, and you have to introduce a better vetting process. But right now it's just a money-making enterprise. That's all it is. You get votes because the immigrants are endeared to whatever party let them in. And let's be honest, it was the Conservatives, just like it is the Liberals now. Conservatives were in power in Canada for 9 years. Immigrant levels flooded in, so it was not at all a conservative liberal thing in Canada at all. They both doing the same basic thing, and you know, so it's for votes, and then it's for the cheap labor. Those two things, the cheap labor, you know, and same reason that depresses the wages. So I'm not going to complain, but yeah, I mean, I don't really want to work in McDonald's. I don't want to work in Starbucks or be a domestic. I'd rather be an entrepreneur and do my own thing and produce my own content and whatever, and have my projects around the world. I'm blessed to come from, you know, a nice background, middle class, upper middle class, I guess, and went to university, and although of course now I realize what was the benefit anyways, but sure, I mean, I learned and was stimulated, and so I have that benefit. But, you know, now I can see, oh, have we really benefited so much? Is diversity necessarily a strength? Well, certainly not necessarily. It's funny because in the 7th grade, or in grade 7, my teacher, Mr. Curry, he was maybe I mentioned this already, but he was always mentioning, like, yeah, Toronto's the most multicultural city in the world, and he was so happy about that. He was only 24 at the time. It was like we were his first class he'd ever taught. He was so full of optimism, probably fresh from teachers' college. Oh boy, teachers aren't, I guess they're left-leaning, aren't they? But anyways, I don't know if he's still like that, but yeah, multiculturalism was like the holy grail for him, and he'd have us celebrate that. I don't remember how many, you know, it was just something he played up a lot, like, oh, Toronto's so great. And sure, yeah, our class would have been diverse. We would have had a Pakistani. So yeah, I've had all these interactions with all these people over the years, and that's great, and I wish them well. I'm not really friends with them right now. Most of my friends are still white males, just like me, but not all of them. I've worked with people from different cultures, from Colombia, from Ghana, and all that. And anyways, so here we are in this big jumble where people are alienated. We flooded our countries with all these immigrants who have not assimilated, and we have social alienation between whites, I guess you could call them, but really between Western people and between people who have not assimilated with the West. And today's St. Patrick's Day. What's that even about? Who does even know what St. Patrick's Day is about? Is that even part of our culture? I guess it's part of our culture. I was just reading about it now, and they say it was actually a feast day. It was sort of celebrating or marking the traditional death of St. Patrick way back over 1,000 years ago. And it's connected to you know, the beginning of Christianity in Ireland. Is that something that people are really aware of? I don't think so. It's just an excuse to go out and drink. So that's another instance of cultural melt. Maybe that's kind of an awkward way of putting it. Cultural dribbling away in this massive sea. So anyways, that's Toronto for you. That's my take on mass immigration. Maybe some people call me a Nazi or whatever. I don't think that's true, though. And that's all I have to say for now. Hasta luego, amigos.